I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This week I'm speaking to Adam Kirtland, who began gardening seriously at the start of lockdown. His initial interest has become a full-blown obsession, and I'm sure many of us can relate to that. I initially thought this episode would be useful for other new gardeners who began to fully embrace gardening earlier in the year and can now identify with the challenges presented by going back to work full-time, especially those who are going back into the office. For me, as someone who started properly gardening at the same age as Adam and who embraced it with as much passion, it was a reminder of the challenges I faced when I started, particularly around sourcing good information. Back then, Instagram was just a twinkle in Facebook's eye. So, for more seasoned gardeners, it may be a useful reflection upon how we communicate with newer gardeners. I start by asking Adam about his gardening journey.
So I've kind of always been into gardening in one way or another, and I think it's really my mum actually that got me into it from a very young age. Both of my nans gardened, and I just remember long summers with my mum bending over weeding, not bending with her knees, just being completely bent over in all the wrong way. My dad mowing the lawn and, just barbecues and things in the garden. But I remember we had a massive garden when I was younger, because we were fortunate to just live on the corner of a cul-de-sac. So we kind of got a massive garden because of that. My mum and dad grew all sorts, all the kind of standard things and some veg and fruit as well. So I think subconsciously that's probably where I've kind of got into it. But then it kind of escaped me for quite a long while. And it's really only this year that I've got back into it, which I think obviously a lot of people have with lockdown and things like that. But I just had that time to actually do it. We've got a young daughter. My wife was on furlough. She's a teacher. So we suddenly had loads of time on our hands. We did all the bits and bobs of DIY around the house that we could think of. And then inevitably it turns to the garden, doesn't it? So, we made the grass, did the weeding, and then suddenly when you could get to a garden centre and things like that, just suddenly started, pun intended, blossoming. And I've just really kind of madly become obsessed with it.
So what were you doing with your garden before you lavished all this care on it? Was it just a kind of afterthought once all the house stuff had been done?
Yeah, I think so. We mowed the grass and we had bits and bobs done in the garden, so we kind of had the fences done to make it look a bit nicer, and a bit of patio that we've got was falling apart, so we had that done. And it's always somewhere that, because we've got a child, we like to have that kind of space outside to be able to run about and kick a ball and all that. So I would mow the grass, and I've got a couple of hedges, so I would trim those, and I would kind of plant stuff from time to time. But I'd never really done anything massive. And then, to be perfectly honest, I think I was on, I don't know whether I can say this or not, but I was on iPlayer and I came across Beech Grove. So rather than Gardener's World, I ended up watching an episode of Beech Grove, and it was just kind of refreshing to see different people talking about gardening. So then naturally I went and watched as many episodes of Beech Grove as I could. And then I think that's kind of what got me into it. Started listening to Gardener's Question Time, which is great, but it can get a little bit repetitive. But then, I started just looking around on Facebook and Instagram, and I suddenly found a world of gardening that I didn't even know kind of existed. There's so many Facebook groups, local ones and national ones that people are part of, which are full to the brim of really knowledgeable people that are just home growers. They're not particularly, they're not trained or anything like that, but they're just really good communities. And the same with Instagram. And that's where my kind of gardening interest has turned to, is Instagram, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. We spoke before, and the traditional gardening media sometimes can be a bit limited. I don't know how you found it. I know when I got into gardening, like you, I did the GQT thing, and I binge listened that, and there were lots of things that I was trying to to listen to and to watch and to get information from. But sometimes, as you say, there's a little bit of an alternative community bubbling under the surface, which is where a lot of the time I was finding the real nuggets of kind of gold when it came to gardening information. Did you find a similar sort of thing?
Definitely, because I think, there's a bit of a joke on kind of GQT that, if it's Bob Flower due, he'll end up mentioning the same things and that kind of thing. They're really interesting, but I find them quite limited. But then I think with things like Facebook and Instagram, all you need to do is quickly post a photo and a little caption, and suddenly you've got, tens of comments of people saying, "Oh no, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that?" And I've found just really interesting things in it. Probably, well, I say interesting, they're probably quite mundane to most people, but there's a thread at the moment on this Facebook group that I'm part of. It's talking about drainage in the bottom of pots. It came out of talking about bulbs. So obviously everyone's planting bulbs at the moment. And someone popped in the comments and said, "Oh, don't forget to add, crocks or gravel at the bottom for drainage." And then somebody chimed in this morning and said, "Actually, that's an old wives' tale," which I didn't know. Some people might know that, but I didn't know. Apparently, if you put crocks and things at the bottom, it actually keeps more water in the pot, and actually raises the water level and actually raises it up nearer to the bulbs and actually makes them rot. So little things like that you probably wouldn't really hear on GQT and stuff, but because you've got this community of people some people are really into bulbs, some people are really into perennials and what have you. So you always get these different people chiming in and all sorts of difference of opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd like to just say that there is an episode on container planting with container planting queen Harriet Rycroft, and she does actually mention the topic of crocks and advises against using them.
Apparently mesh is the thing. If you just put mesh at the bottom to stop the soil falling out, it may say this in your episode, but
no, actually it doesn't. So
no.
I love that. I love the fact that there's always different kind of techniques.
Exactly. I'll still put crocks in the bottom though, to be honest. I can't see myself stopping doing it because I think most people, everybody does it. And
I know.
I don't know why they do if it's wrong.
Yeah, I know exactly that. Even though I know it's not best practice, I still sometimes can't stop myself doing it. I think it's because a lot of people have already got the crocks in the bottom of the pot, and it's actually more to get rid of them when you're redoing them. So just leave them in there.
Well, I went to the effort the other day. I didn't have any crocks or any old pots, and I just looked in the cupboard and found a mug that I didn't like, so I just smashed that up instead. I'm not condoning doing that, because your cupboards will be bare of mugs, but there you go.
So that's really interesting. It's the kind of instant answers that you get on social media, and that's definitely a new format for gardening advice. Have you returned to work now? Yeah,
so I, strangely, considering how quickly I got into the garden, I had a relatively short amount of time off compared to, I think, most people. Obviously, some people are still on furlough. I was only off for about 6 weeks. So that sounds, in any normal time, that would be a long time, but where there's people now off for 6 months. But so I crammed quite a lot in that time, and we built a pergola, we built a seating area in that time, and we did so much in that time. So going back to work has been a bit of not a shock, because I love work, but suddenly not being able to do what I've been doing kind of all day, every day, was a bit of an adjustment.
And do you think you'll be able to manage the garden still with less time?
Not to the same level that it was before, certainly. And because I'm still relatively new to it, I'm still taking a lot of information in. It's getting to a new season where I will kind of hold my hands up and say, there's some things that I've got no idea what I need to do. There are things that are turning that, do I need to dig them out? Are they, I bought them as plants. Are they actually tubers? So things like dahlias, for example. What do I do with those? But that for me has been part of the interesting thing about it, is finding out all these new things. But I don't think I will be able to keep it to the same standard as it was, making it sound like it's an RHS garden. But I certainly don't think I will. So I'm having to try and find ways of maintaining it just, the best I can with the limited time that I've got.
Do you think you might lose interest in it again?
I don't think I will. I've got quite an addictive personality, so once I'm into something, I'll keep it going. So I certainly don't think I will. I've got a cold frame, and I've started some seeds for next year, and I've taken some cuttings for next year. So even if my interest slightly kind of wanes over, winter and Christmas, I know I'll go back to that cold frame and I'll see things that I've grown and I think, right, that'll kind of spur me on again in the spring. And I've planted a load of bulbs as well. So when things are kind of turning and when the spring comes through and things are starting to come up, I think that will naturally bring me back out. So I don't think, I certainly hope not anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure you won't, because I think it is once you get the bug, you're away. But are there any particular things that you've noticed that were time consuming and that you probably won't do, going forward?
I think, I know it sounds daft, but weeding is probably the thing, isn't it? But obviously through winter, a lot of that is kind of suppressed. So I can kind of not worry about that too much. And once you've got to the point where a lot of, you've cut back or you've divided your herbaceous perennials or whatever, a lot of that work is kind of done. Obviously, you don't really have to mow the grass over winter. So I think it's a bit of a myth that you don't have to do things over winter, because there's definitely lots to do. But I think my interest will still stay there. And because I'm so kind of into it on Instagram, that'll keep my interest as well. So even if I'm not out doing things physically all the time, I'll still keep an eye in.
I actually put a shout out on Twitter and said, for anybody who is relatively new to gardening and has gone back to work after furlough, what would be your top tips for certainly sort of the change in season and to keep the garden going over winter? And I think almost exclusively people came back and said to me, the soil, you have to look after the soil, which I thought was interesting. Are you doing anything apart from obviously, scaling back your weeding regime? Is there anything you're doing to, help your soil through the winter or to try and improve it for next year?
No, there's bits and bobs that I'll probably mulch, or I'll put a layer of gravel over a few bits and bobs. But no, I've got quite good soil. We're right in the middle of Birmingham, which you wouldn't think would have the best soil, but it actually is pretty good. It's quite acidic, which is not necessarily strange, but does limit some of the things that we can grow. But that does mean that we can grow acers and things in the ground with kind of relative ease. But some days will need a bit of care over winter. But in terms of the soil, it's really good actually. What's your soil like where you are?
We have got very heavy clay, so either you can't get near it, it's like a rock, or you just get stuck in it. Constantly improving soil is a mission for me.
I haven't got to do that, fortunately.
No, well, that is a big thing actually, and you're quite lucky with that. So, what other things are you thinking of doing that will maybe save you time? Or because I'm just aware that a lot of people have got into it really heavily, and part of my perennial concern for gardeners who are new to it is that they kind of get their teeth stuck into it. They do lots of exciting projects, and then sometimes the things fail. And I worry that if they get to that failure point, they get disheartened and they lose interest. And that's what I try and avoid with people. I really, really want them to sort of persevere and just have the knowledge to say, okay, it's fine. We can get through this. Even if we have a rough winter, we will be fine. We can come out the other side and we can start again. So what kind of tips could you offer to people who've not got maybe so much time?
I think, so this is the thing, isn't it, with gardening? It's almost entirely trial and error. And unless you train, you do an RHS course or whatever, you don't really know. And a lot of that is trial and error and kind of just trying things out. So I think a lot of the time, I was thinking about this morning, funnily enough. I was pottering about in the garden this morning before we started. And I think you almost have to go through two years of gardening to kind of really know what your garden does. I've put 2 echinaceas in, one right next to each other, and the one has completely failed, and the other one is thriving, which is strange, right next to each other. So what I'll probably do next year is grow the same again and see, but in a different place, and see if it was that. And then I know then for that 3rd year, just probably not to bother with that one, or to do it in a pot or whatever. But in terms of keeping things going over winter, for me, the biggest challenge I've found is because I've got a small child. Most of my days off tend to be, going out somewhere to the park or, a National Trust or something. So I don't tend to get too much time in the garden. And when I get home, at 6:30, 7, it's already getting dark or is dark. So you're really limited as to what you can do. Strangely, today I've got a rare day off completely on my own. So I'm cramming in as much as I possibly can. But over winter, you're probably going to think I'm mad with this, but because it's dark, where we live, it gets really dark. I bought a headlight, like a miner. So yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. I tried it out for the first time last night. Did feel like a bit of an oddball, and I think the neighbours are probably looking out the windows thinking, what on earth is he doing? But it gives me enough light to be able to kind of deadhead the things that still need deadheading and pull up the weeds that I can see. But I think that you need to pick one real thing for over kind of autumn and winter that you're going to continue doing. So whether that is weeding or, deadheading or whatever it is, or, maintaining the shrubs or the hebies or whatever, pick one thing that you're really going to invest your time in. It might, things might slip, and I think that's fine. I don't think there is ever a point where you just get to, right, okay, I'll finish my garden. I just don't think anybody ever gets to that, do they?
No. Well,
it just doesn't happen. No, I'm definitely not there. I've always got a list of things I want to do, and then I do those and I think, okay, well, actually that's raised something else, and I've got more space than I thought I had, or I've got less space than I thought I had. But I think, just try and pick one thing to keep going through winter. And we are fortunate, like I said earlier, we don't have to mow the lawn, we don't have to do a lot of things in winter. So that does, in theory, a bit more time. It might mean that the daylight time is a bit less, but that's what I would say.
I always think that you can let your entire garden go over winter.
Yeah.
If you really haven't got the time and it's horrible weather, just let it go. And then if you want one thing to just kind of carry you through to next spring, just have one pot by your front door or one pot on your balcony, and that focus of that pot looking nice will just kind of lift you. Otherwise, it's really easy to stand. I mean, I do it. I stand at my kitchen sink and look out and just go, oh my God, it's hideous. And it's really hard to get over that hurdle, because actually the more you dread going out there, the less you go out there. So you can feel a bit overwhelmed by it. But if you can just ignore it, and like you said, it's never gone too far. You can always start again. It's fine. Just don't get overwhelmed by it and disillusioned with the whole thing. Just get yourself something really cheerful. You can even have an evergreen, or if you pick a shrub that can sit in your eye line that is beautiful, or looks good all year round, or looks good in the autumn or the winter. It just gives you that little glimmer of hope and that little bit of interest to start again next year. So I think that's a brilliant tip.
Exactly. I think there's something that I've seen about. I don't know if it's kind of on the cusp of being some sort of gardening trend. God, that sounds exciting. But bulb lasagnas seem to be all over the place at the moment. I don't know if you're seeing that, but I saw it on Beech Grove. I did one about 3 weeks ago now. I saw it on Beech Grove a couple of weeks ago. And then on my Facebook gardening group, there's tons of people doing it. I've seen it all over Instagram as well. But they're really good things to kind of see through winter, because I don't know if you talked about them on here, but it's pretty obvious what it is. But it's basically layers of bulbs in a pot that flower at different times. So come spring, you've kind of got a long lasting display. But it's the nice thing to do now. Obviously now is the right time to start doing bulbs anyway, but it's a great thing to do now, because if you do that and pop some winter bedding on the top, it's not very exciting, but pansies or violas or whatever, that then you've got the colour through winter, and then when you get to spring and things start to pop through, you've got something that's kind of lasting you from now probably through to, I don't know, May, which is quite a long time really, and it's not going to be the same thing for that whole time. But that's one good thing to really do. And if you got that by your door, which you'd want it somewhere kind of sheltered anyway, and you see that, you're seeing the pansies through winter, that's a really nice thing to do.
Yeah, agreed, it is. Cool. Anything else that you think people should do?
So something that I've done, obviously Instagram has kind of kept me going, because I'm seeing it as a bit of a kind of a journal or a log of what I've done over the last year. But I've also started a garden journal as well. I've got a really brilliant 5-year RHS gardener's record book, which has the 5 years on every page. So when I come to this week next year, I'll be able to see what I did last year, which again, I think, especially for new gardeners, is a great thing to do, because you sometimes, when you really get into it, you can suddenly go into the garden centre every weekend and buy loads of things and pop it in and it dies and you forget about it completely. But I sometimes find I'll look back at the last few weeks and think, God, I forgot I even bought that, and it has gone, and I haven't really realised it's gone. So, when you come to the time next year and you forgot about those plants that have failed, you'll look at your journal and you'll say, okay, I'm probably not going to try that again. I found that really, really useful.
A lot of gardeners would not do that because they would be absolutely terrified at the amount of money and plants that they spend.
I did start writing the prices of things, but I stopped because it was quite scary. And also, I'm just looking at it now. The first week that I did it, I think I did it in May or June. It's really detailed. There's a weather section. I put mixed, wet and dry, 15 degrees average. What days I was going to water the garden, what's in bloom, what tasks I was going to do, and any other notes. And then I've just looked at last week's, and then weather, it just says wet, plants bloom, none, tasks, mow the grass. So that's a bit different from 3 months ago.
Yeah, well, again, that's something you can pick up, I suppose, when you've got more time, and some weeks, if you don't do it, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, it's a brilliant record to have. And like you say, Instagram's excellent because I sometimes think, oh, I can't for the life of me remember what that dahlia was called, and I'll just flick through my Instagram and then I'll actually have written it on at the time. So yeah, that's really helpful.
It is, yeah. I think the only other thing that I have really wanted to do, now that the garden's kind of settled and I kind of know what's working, or I certainly know what has worked, and I think will probably come back next year, is I've always wanted to kind of sketch out the garden as well, just so I can look at it and think about what's where. So I've started to kind of do that, not in any great detail, but just draw out the border and just plot on what's what. I've also found that really helpful because I've put a load of bulbs in the gaps, and I tend to just kind of go rogue, and I'll end up just getting a trowel out and I'll dig up bulbs. So I've plotted on there where I've put bulbs in as well. But I'm almost certain that'll be the last time I'll do that. I don't think I'll sketch it again because it'll just change again next year. I'll end up digging things up and moving them, and I can't be bothered to sketch it all again. It's too much hassle. Fair
enough. I mean, photographs are good too.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm finding with Instagram, to be honest, is it's a really good, it is a good record, but it's just a nice way of, there's hashtags and all sorts of stuff. So if you pop up a picture of hydrangea, and you pop up the hydrangea hashtag and you click it and you see everybody else's hydrangeas. And every now and again, you'll see the one that you've put in and think, God, theirs looks tons better than mine. What am I doing wrong? And then you just pop them a comment and say, and then it just becomes this, back and forth, which I don't think you think of Instagram, things like that, having a gardening community as such. You just think it's, I'm going to sound really old now, like Kim Kardashian or whatever, post pictures themselves, but it's not that. There's so much more. And strangely, this is going another level. I'm probably slightly too old to be on TikTok. But I downloaded TikTok the other day just to see if there was a gardening kind of community on there, and there is. It's not as kind of vibrant as Facebook and Instagram, but it's on there, and that's obviously the next thing that'll come along. And I think it's really important for those things to come about for the next generation of gardeners. So I'm only 32, but to be into gardening as much as I am is it's not rare for a 32-year-old, but it's always seen as a fuddy-duddy thing, isn't it, gardening? But it's not. I don't think it is anyway.
No, I mean, it might be. It shouldn't be, though.
No. It depends what you do with it, though, doesn't it?
I guess so, yeah. I think probably a lot of from what the feedback I get, it seems as if the slightly younger audience is more, perhaps more involved in kind of the growing food movement. There's a lot of sort of social responsibility that goes with the garden, really.
Definitely, yeah. There's tons of allotmenters on Instagram. They probably outnumber gardeners, to be honest, but seeing some of the stuff that they're doing. But again, probably a few years ago, you drive past an allotment and inevitably it's kind of the same kind of middle-aged people that are, growing the pumpkins or whatever, but it's not that anymore. It's definitely not. And I think the waiting list for allotments, I'll have to try and find it, but I saw a statistic the other day that it now takes twice as long to get an allotment. There's a lot of people, and it took a long time before, didn't it? But because so many people have got into it during lockdown, but it's like you said earlier, it's kind of hoping that those people carry it on, and knowing that there's, a failed crop if it's an allotment. Doesn't mean that you failed. You know, you can try it again or try something different. It might just be that your circumstances are not right for that particular crop.
Yeah, I saw a scheme on Facebook the other day that was advertising this rent a garden scheme. I think you could, you know, if you had a garden and you didn't necessarily want to do anything with it, you could rent it out to somebody who did. So maybe that might be a good way forward.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I've not seen that.
Yeah, I was thinking of renting mine out. So you mentioned you've got a young daughter. Are you involved in her in gardening?
Yeah, as much as possible. So she's only 2 at the moment. She's nearly 3. So she probably at the start of the year when we started, she wasn't really interested, and we had all that glorious weather. So I was just happy with her kind of getting under my feet. To be honest, that was great. But we've got a little herb garden, and we've got an old kind of whiskey barrel that we've turned into like a fairy garden, a bit of a cliche, but we've put some little plants in there and things that need deadheading. So really basics, but through summer we put petunias in, and you know, obviously they just need kind of constantly deadheading. So we got her helping with that, and she's got a little watering can. She likes to water the garden. And the other day, it's strange, I hadn't realised how much she'd picked up, but we were stood by the herbs, and she was rubbing her hands on it, smelling her hand, and she went, mint. And I didn't know that she knew, and for a kind of a 2-year-old, I thought that was brilliant.
That is quite
so she'd obviously picked up what we'd been saying, and now she knows that we kind of use it in food and things as well. So I'm hoping slowly that kind of over time she'll understand that that's where kind of our food comes from, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, she's loving it.
The next generation of gardeners appears to be in safe hands. Many thanks to Adam for speaking to me about his gardening journey, and don't forget you can follow his journey on Instagram, links in the show notes. Thanks to you too for listening. To play us out, here's Dr. Ian Bedford talking about a not so welcome garden visitor. I don't kill anything in my garden, so I would not want to be presented with the moral dilemma of finding a flatworm, which has thankfully not happened thus far. But if you do find what you think is a flatworm, or in fact any other bug that you're not sure about, please don't act on a knee-jerk impulse to squish it. Always make sure to correctly identify bugs before deciding whether to act as judge, jury and executioner.
During the 1960s, Britain's gardeners were being alerted to the appearance of a new invasive, slimy-looking ribbon-like creature called a flatworm that was coming in with pot plants imported from the other side of the world. This was the New Zealand flatworm, a dark brown species that could grow up to 8 inches long. Then 20 years later, the Australian flatworm, a much smaller orange species, also began appearing. Flatworms are a very primitive group of organisms that have remained unchanged for about 500 million years and are thought to be the oldest living ancestors to all bilateral animals, which are those that have a right and a left-hand side. The appearance in Britain of these 2 invasive species, though, initially caused great concern, since they were known to be voracious predators of one of the most important soil conditioning and organic waste recycling creatures, the earthworms, which were also a vital food source for many of our native wildlife. Despite efforts to contain the spread of these flatworms, both species have now become established in Britain, with the New Zealand flatworm mainly within the northern regions, whilst the Australian just within the southern counties of England and Wales. And so it's not uncommon to find at least one of these species within home gardens, under plant pots, or in a shady damp area on the soil surface, where they can remain active throughout the year. And although their impact on the native earthworm populations might not be noticeable, it's often quite severe. So when these species of flatworm are found, the current advice is to report the sightings to the British Non-Native Secretariat, and if possible to destroy the creatures. Since there are no products available for their control, this would have to be done manually, but it might be worth knowing that flatworms are capable of reproducing by a process known as fission, where detached sections of their bodies can grow back into new individuals.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.